Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Allen of USA Today, and I'm joined by my podcast partner, Bob Duff. And this is the hockeydebates.com podcast, and we're here twice a week to talk all things hockey and plenty to talk about this week, Bob. But I wanted to start out with, since there's been a lot of discussion about Mike Babcock, here's everyone's heard the story of Mitch Marner, how he asked him to rank the players in terms of work ethic, and now the story came out from Chris Chelios about the Johan Franzen abusive diatribe directed by Mike Babcock that caused him a nervous breakdown. And then recently, Darren McCarty said that he felt Babcock cost the team the 2009 Stanley Cup championship. And you and I have been around this team. We were around Babcock a lot. I'm sure we both have opinions on whether he is or isn't a good coach, but I want to get your thoughts. With all this discussion, how do you rate Mike Babcock as a coach?
Well, one NHL executive once told me the difference between Mike Babcock and Scotty Bowman is one's a genius and one thinks he's a genius. Decide which one's which. But I think X's and O's, as has been said quite frequently, I think he's a great X's and O's coach, but he doesn't seem to be a good manager of personalities. And that's, I think, especially in today's game, I think that's the biggest part of coaching in all sports is managing the personalities, because the players have more say and more power than they had in the old days. And certainly, whatever stereotype you want to attach to millennials, I think millennials just, and younger players in general, you can't just tell them to run through the wall. You got to explain to them why you need them to run through the wall, and you've got to give them a rational explanation and thought process as to why it's a good idea to run through that wall. And I think, the coaches who can do that are the ones that are going to succeed going forward.
Yeah, and Ken Holland always said that Mike Babcock was the most prepared coach that he had ever seen. That Mike Babcock knew how to get his team ready to play a specific game, and that included, I think, Holland felt getting players ready. But now we're starting to hear. I mean, it's not like we didn't know that Mike Babcock wasn't popular with his players. I mean, that was well known. He was demanding on them. But I think a lot of people just kind of dismiss that as being, hey, no one likes being, called in on the mat for their performance level. And that's what Babcock did. But obviously, it went beyond that. Did you see any indication that you felt that Mike Babcock's antics as Darren McCarty said, cost the team the 2009 Stanley Cup?
I think that might be stretching it a bit. You look back at that series, and they had some pretty significant injuries. Nick Lidstrom had a serious injury. Pavel Datsyuk had a serious injury. Franzen had a serious injury. Those are three huge pieces of the Red Wings puzzle that were all playing at less than 100%, and they still made it to Game 7. So, it's kind of hard to pin that on Babcock, I think. I don't think he'd lost the team yet then. I think in the next 2-3 years it certainly happened. And I think by the 2012 with the infamous episode on the bench with Franzen, I think by then the team had really gone south on him, and I think they just had enough of him. But I don't know if 2009, and they just won the cup, I kind of find it hard to blame him in that scenario for the loss.
Do you see him getting a job again? Is somebody going to take a chance on him?
Well, according to Hockey Night in Canada's Elliot Friedman, he's already been contacted by 2 teams. So obviously not every team in the league has been scared away by what's going on. I mean, the guy does succeed, everywhere he's been. He got Anaheim to the finals. He won a cup in Detroit. Toronto's kind of been his one bump in the road where he wasn't able to get them to do it in the playoffs. But, even Scotty Bowman had his bump in the road in Buffalo. So I think if you look at every great coach, there's at least one stop on their path where things didn't go their way. So I don't think, it would be politically, I would think it'd be very hard to bring Mike Babcock in right now. You'd certainly face a lot of public and I think media scrutiny that would be above and beyond the normal kind of attention that's paid to a hockey team. So I think it would have to probably be in a market where hockey isn't the be all and end all, and you could maybe get it to work there. But I just think it would be very hard for him to come into a major market as his next job.
Yeah, and like anything else, you need time. Time heals all wounds, as the saying goes, and I think it's important from a public relations standpoint as well. To get beyond the issues of the day, and as long as this code of conduct regarding the coaches is in the news, it's probably not the right time to hire Mike Babcock. I want to get your thoughts too while we're talking about coaches, just quickly on. A lot of rumors that Peter Laviolette is in trouble, and not because of the, video that seems to show him striking Billy Leno on the helmet on the bench, or the fact that Carcelo has said that he sort of created a culture of fighting when he was in Philadelphia, and he felt pressure to fight there. But because simply the Predators don't look like the Predators. Do you see him as being in trouble? Are we moving closer? We've talked about that on the Thursday show in terms of what the chances are and whether or not he's among the favorites to be let go. But what's your thoughts on whether he's going to last there?
Well, I think if they don't turn it around soon, yeah, he'd definitely be in trouble. I mean, that's a team that had high hopes this year and had expectations of being a Stanley Cup contender. And as it stands right now, we don't know that they're going to be a playoff team. It's a huge, you just paid Roman Yossi a huge amount of money to keep him in town. Pekka Rinne's not getting any younger, and they got to win, I think, in the next 2-3 years, or they're not. Their window, like San Jose's, will look like it's starting to close, and they're not performing to what we're used to seeing from Nashville.
The when Seattle comes in, that gives 32 teams. That's more than they have in Major League Baseball. Do you think, Bob, we're at the limit, or do you see the NHL expanding even further? What is the limit in the NHL, and do you think expansion is more important in the NHL than it is in, say, the NFL or Major League Baseball or the NBA?
I think we're past the limit, in my opinion. I mean, you look at how hard it is for teams to find competent defensemen now, and you're going to add another team and then think about adding more beyond that. Defensemen to me are like pitchers in baseball. I mean, you look at how hard it is now to find 4 or 5 decent pitchers to fill out a rotation, let alone a bullpen. And they just keep adding teams, and you keep thinning out the talent pool. I just don't see how you can do that and still call yourself a major league. I mean, you're putting more and more guys in the NHL who shouldn't be in the NHL. And, is that part of the reason why it's so hard to score goals now? Because, half the guys in the league can't score?
Well, I'm going to disagree with you on that. I mean, we've doubled the player pool with, the growth of the sport in America. I don't see that it's any problem. If what you're saying is we don't have, as many top defensemen to give an all-star or two on every team, well, that's true. But, there's guys that can play in the league who are all on every defense. I don't think they're all, very poor players. But this is my take on expansion, regardless of the talent pool. I think it's more important in the NHL to expand than it is for the NFL and NBAs, because their television packages are so strong. It doesn't really matter what their gate revenue is, but the NHL is still a gate revenue driven league, and they, as long as they keep increasing the gate, they're going to continue to grow even stronger in terms of their revenue. And they're not. It's not like they're going to break the bank with their next television package whenever that comes to pass. And it's not like they're going to suddenly get NFL money. It's still going to be a struggle. So they're still very dependent upon the revenue from the gate. And I think when you get new teams like that supposedly as strong as the Vegas Golden Knights ticket sales were prior to starting, Seattle's even stronger. And I think that's going to be important for the league. So, and I still see that Quebec still wants a team. I think there's still the talk of getting another team, somewhere west of the Mississippi. I could see this league going to 34 teams. I really could. And I don't think it matters that the NFL has fewer teams or the Major League Baseball. I think the NHL is still a kind of a unique sport because they're so dependent upon their gate revenue.
It's kind of funny when you think about it, how many years they stood at 6 teams while the other leagues were growing. And yet now they're the one that's kind of lapped everybody and taken the lead in terms of the number of teams. And you're right, Quebec should have a team. There's no doubt about that in my mind. But should you count on all of these markets you're in now surviving? Do you think every market in the league is solid and stable now, or are there still some to worry about? I mean, certainly.
Well, that's a fair question. I'd say the jury's still out in Florida and Arizona. But I think we're going to have a better read on Arizona as long as they continue to play as well as they are now. They've been very impressive. The way they played this season. And what I think, if you're a fan of the Coyotes, you should be most excited about is they're playing a style that's sustainable. They're a defensive team, one of the top defensive teams. They keep the puck out of their net. And, that's not going to be impacted by the loss of a player, one player or two players. I mean, it's a system that's kind of working there. Rick Tocchet has done a good job. So, for example, I like the Oilers too, but the Oilers are way too dependent on Connor McDavid and Draisaitl. They're just not deep enough. And they do not have the defensive prowess that Arizona does. So even though I like both of them, if you ask me which one I think is, has the best chance of winning the division or continuing to play at that same level, I'd have to say Arizona, just because I think it's based on their defense. But with regard to teams that are in trouble, those are really the only two that I see. As we still don't know. Like Florida still has trouble drawing. Arizona still where they're located in Glendale just doesn't seem to be a good location for a team in Arizona. So that could cause problems as well. They've tried to get a new arena, and there doesn't seem to be anything on the horizon. So, maybe they'll end up, Quebec City will be a landing spot for them. If that happens, then I think the league might be a little reluctant to go any further than 32 teams. If it doesn't happen, I think ultimately Quebec City will get a team, and then they'll be on the hunt for a 34th team to balance it out.
Well, I had a conversation with a pretty famous person in September who I was shocked to discover had been a Florida Panthers season ticket holder from day one, and that was Jack Nicklaus. He told me he'd only been to one game, though. He usually gives them. He said he does it to support the local teams. He lives in the Miami area. He has season tickets for the Marlins, for the Panthers, for the Heat, and for the Dolphins. And now his grandson's playing for the Dolphins, so he has reason to go to those games. But he said the only game they went to was him and his wife went, and he said their seats are right on the glass. They went to one of the games in the Stanley Cup final in '96 against the Avalanche. And when they were throwing the rats on the ice, he said his wife, Barbara, was quite startled when they started throwing the rats on the ice.
Yeah, I'm not sure you can count Jack as a season ticket holder if he's only been to one game. That's more like a charitable donation, if you ask me. And to be honest, the Panthers, were in need of charitable donations for a lot of years. So I think that's important. They've played well according to the standings this season, they being the Panthers. But I just have some mistrust for that team right now. Their goal differential, they just give up too many goals, for my liking. So we'll have to see whether or not they've turned the corner. I think everybody thought they were going to be better this season, but we're not quite sure where we're at with them. Another subject I want to ask you about, Bob, is I saw in The Athletic that Jim Rutherford, who is pretty calculating when he talks about players, there's always a message, I think, for players when he talks about players that he hopes they will heed. And he told The Athletic that, Galchenyuk may be out of a playing position when Crosby and Bukestad and some other people start coming back. When the injuries start coming back, that Galchenyuk, who's on the fourth line now, may be out of the lineup. And when you consider that he was the primary return on Phil Kessel's departure to Arizona, I think that's sort of a pretty sad commentary. He's only scored 2 goals this year. He hasn't really fit all that well. I think he has 10 points. And he just has never lived up to his billing as the number 3 draft pick in his draft year, Bob.
Well, he had the 1 year in Montreal where he scored 30 goals, and you thought, okay, he's figuring it out. And then he just seemed to regress, and he just kept regressing. And, now he's been the downside in 2 really lopsided trades, because Max Domi certainly worked out well for Montreal, the guy that Arizona sent to the Habs to get him, thinking he could be one of their top 2 centers. And it only took him 1 season to decide, no, he couldn't. And yet in Arizona, he got off to he had an injury, but then when he got in the lineup, he played pretty well to start with them, and it just seemed to just keep getting worse and worse. And he's, how many chances is this guy going to get? This is his 3rd team. He just doesn't seem. Is it confidence? Does he have trouble playing in a big market like a Montreal or a Pittsburgh where there's expectations? You look around. I remember one time I talked to Doug Waite, and we were just got on the subject of confidence, and I think we can both agree that Doug Waite was a pretty good NHLer. And he said that, when you lose that confidence, you just don't think you can do anything. And he said he had times in his career, even when he was an established NHLer, where his confidence would wane and he really doubted himself. If a guy of that level can doubt himself, when you've got a bubble guy like a Galchenyuk, and you look at, Brendan Perlini with the Red Wings, there's a guy who scored 17 goals one season. Right now, it looks like he couldn't shoot the puck in the ocean. Is it a confidence thing with him? Is it? Everybody says good things about him. I know when I talked to Rick Tocchet about him last year, Rick Tocchet loved him. Nobody criticizes his work ethic. Nobody criticizes his personality. He's a real mystery.
Yeah. Did the Penguins make a mistake? They wanted Kessel out of there, and they really didn't have a lot of options. Phil Kessel had a no-trade agreement. I think they had a better deal worked out with Minnesota, with Zucker, as I recall, coming back. But Kessel didn't want to go to Minnesota. He wanted to go to Arizona, I think, because he liked Tocchet. What's your thought? Are they gonna look back and regret that deal?
Well, I think they needed the cap space, so they kind of had to move Kessel's contract. So I guess they have to look at it from a financial standpoint. They had to make a move, but when the guy's got 2 goals and he's barely hanging on the 4th line, and like you say, with key players like Hornquist and Crosby and Bukestad all expected back next month, you can go from the 12th forward to the 15th forward real fast, and it does look like, and Jimmy Rutherford doesn't miss too often, but it does look like he swung and missed on this one.
Yeah, no, that's right. He does not swing and miss very often. Interesting to note, though, speaking of the Coyotes and Penguins, when they made a trade, I think that was a trade between the 2 most aggressive trading general managers in the league, because he doesn't get enough credit. But John Chayka has made a bushel of trades since he came. Now, a lot of them are really small trades that, there are people who leave you scratching your head about name recognition and whether or not they'll ever make it. But he never stops pulling the levers. And I think he's been a terrific find for them, and has moved beyond the novelty stage of being the youngest GM and moving into really doing a good job. I think he's now got that team the way he wanted it to be right from the beginning. It's just taken him some time, to get it done.
Well,
all right, go ahead.
I really hope that they do get it going, because, it's nice for one thing to just see teams that have never really had that chance to excel, to get a run on the top and be a contender. And they really have never had that. And you wonder, how would that affect the fan base in Arizona if this team moved to the top and stayed there for a few seasons? Would we suddenly see hockey become a passion amongst the people in the desert? We certainly saw that with Florida when they went to the finals in '96. Now, Florida didn't stay at that level, so it's the old argument about like people talk about places like Toronto and that in Montreal where they've always got a full house, but you know, are the teams that only get fans when they're performing well? Do they have the best, smarter fan bases? Like people that are, we see it with the Red Wings right now. They were filling that place. You couldn't beg, borrow, or steal a ticket for the Red Wings not so long ago, but now you can get them on the secondary market sometimes for $5. So if a fan base is going to keep buying the tickets no matter how much the team stinks, then what incentive is there for that team to get better?
Yeah, and this the Little Caesars Arena Detroit Red Wings marriage has answered the age-old question of whether if you automatically build a new arena, people will come. I think the people in Detroit have said, yeah, I like your arena. It's a very nice arena, but you know what? If you're going to continue to play bad hockey, we are not going to come no matter how nice the arena is. So, I think it's going to be a while before we'll see building a building that's filled with the Red Wing fans, because the team just simply hasn't been, competitive. The last game was probably as competitive as they had been in a while, but for the most part, this is a team that is struggling. And as I've said a few times, I don't think Steve Yzerman is all that upset. I think he realized, despite the fact that Ken Holland, his good friend, thought they might be able to compete this year. I think he believed they wouldn't compete and that he was still a ways away from being a competitive team. And I think he just thought, look, I'm going to, I got Moritz Seider last year. I'll get another premium draft pick this year and probably one more next year. And then he'll be ready to compete. So I don't know that he's worked all that aggressively to try to fix the issues with the Red Wings for this season. I think he's content to let this team bottom out a little bit more just to facilitate a stronger rebuild.
I was racking my brain the other day trying to think about, you look at the city of Detroit and its sports franchises right now. You've got you had the worst team in Major League Baseball in the summer in the Tigers. You've got right now the worst team in the NHL in the Red Wings. The Lions aren't the worst team in the NFL, but they're not far off, and they're last in their division. And again, the Pistons aren't the worst team in the NBA, but they don't look that good either. I was trying to think of a city that had all four of its teams go south like this at the same time, and I just really can't, in my memory, think of one city that just had it so terrible.
Yeah, and you can even go further because the Michigan football team is certainly a state team, and it has only had one win against Ohio State in the last 15 years or so. So it hasn't been nearly as fun to be a Michigan fan either. So it's really not been a great time to be a sports fan in the Detroit metropolitan area. Bob, we're closing down this decade, and you're starting to see a lot of stories about this team, the best plays of the decade, the best team of the decade. And I just want to ask you about two different categories. Number one, I think for the team of the last decade, it comes down really to, do you prefer the Pittsburgh Penguins back-to-back championships, or do you prefer the Chicago Blackhawks winning, 3 with Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves and Brent Seabrook and Duncan Keith leading the way? Which of those two teams do you see as the team of the decade, or am I wrong? Do you have someone else that you think is the team of the decade?
I'd probably go for the Blackhawks because, they were kind of the modern day salary cap version of a dynasty. That they were able to win it and then kind of have to tear it down a little bit. They kept the core in place, but they had to move some bodies out and bring some different bodies in to stay under the cap and win it again 2 more times. So they've had to kind of adjust on the fly, change on the go, is a hockey saying, and they've certainly were able to do that. And to win 3 different cups over the span they did, I think, is more impressive than the Penguins 2 in a row.
Yeah, I agree with you. I had to actually answer that question for my newspaper, and I did a little video on it. And I went with the Blackhawks as well. And I don't think it's an easy choice because repeating is pretty darn hard in this, era, or any era really in the National Hockey League, at least in the modern era. So I think their feat of and the Blackhawks won each of those cups, even though their core sort of remained the same. They really changed a lot of players on the outside. Like Stan Bowman was moving and shaking, changing up that roster. And they had salary cap problems right from the beginning, and he kept it competitive and kept that team in the hunt, and the consistency of Taves and Kane really did that. And now the second question I have for you, and I think this is a really difficult question, and that is the player of the decade. Do you prefer Crosby or Ovechkin? I think this is like arguing Jimmy Brown versus Barry Sanders, or Larry Bird versus Magic Johnson. Like, this is just a tough question of who was the better player of this decade.
Well, the old hockey theory is, if you're deciding, I think if I'm a general manager trying to build a team that's going to win the Stanley Cup, I would love to have Sidney Crosby as my centerpiece. He's not only going to be your best player and your hardest worker, he is going to set an example for the rest of that team in terms of determination and work ethic and desire and passion that is second to none. And he's won 3 Stanley Cups and played in 4 finals for a reason. But if I'm a fan going to the game and I want to be entertained, I'm paying to see Alexander Ovechkin play hockey, because he's the most exciting player in the NHL as far as I'm concerned. So I guess I'm going 1 and 1A in a sense. I'd love to have both of them on my team, but I think if it push comes to shove, I'd probably slightly choose Crosby just ahead of Ovechkin.
Way to walk it right down the middle. And I don't blame you. Everyone knows I just have such a great admiration and fascination with Sidney Crosby. I just think he's such a terrific player, underrated as a defensive player and as a leader. And if I'm building a team, I don't think there's any question that I take Crosby. And he's a center, and Ovechkin is the wing as well. So it is apples and oranges. But saying all that, and passing along paying my respects to Crosby's greatness, and recognizing that you're right, we're splitting hairs here. I'm giving it to Ovechkin. I can't believe I'm saying that, but I am, for this simple reason. We thought that Wayne Gretzky's goals record was beyond reproach. No one was going to compete with that. No one was going to get close. And Ovechkin has scored so many goals in this decade that we now have to say he has a chance. Like, he's right there. Like, if he plays and stays at this level, he could do it. Like, that's remarkable. In this era, when it's so hard to score goals, that Alex Ovechkin can routinely score 50 goals. He may do it again this year. And he led his team to the Stanley Cup. He did what Barry Trotz asked him to do. He won him a title. I think this year, too, that team is still in contention. It still could win it. So even though, I'm a Crosby guy in my heart, I think Ovechkin is the player of the decade. That's my feeling on that. It's, difficult for sure, but I think I'd go with him. And, in terms of the entertainment, I think they're close. But you're right. When Ovechkin sets up in that left wing area over there, and the puck comes across to him, everybody knows where he's going to be. Everybody knows how hard he shoots it. Somehow it goes in the net. He's just a joy to watch. But anyway, we're running out of time today. I think that's a great place to leave it. And the player of the decade, I'm Kevin Allen. He's Bob Duff. This is the hockeydebates.com podcast. We'll see you again later in the week.
Thanks for tuning in.